VikesNow, I am Dustin Baker. We are 75 days away from the Vikings' first regular season game at the New York Giants in New Jersey. The Vikings are 1-point underdogs. So what we're going to do today, we still got about a little less than a month before training camp, is start to look at some X-Factor players and kind of go through those. First, though, I want to talk to producer Tyler. He's going to go through this X-Factor show with me. How are you, man?
I'm doing well, man. How you doing?
Not bad. Did you have a good weekend, or what do we got going on?
Not much happening this weekend. I'm just ready for the NBA draft. I know it's a different sport, but I'm not a huge baseball guy myself, so I can't bring myself to keep up with the Minnesota Twins. But yeah, we are just sitting like ducks, waiting for training camp to start, waiting for the NBA draft, which is tomorrow. So yeah, hopefully sports start to ramp up here soon, man. But I am doing well.
Wonderful. All right, so X Factor, it's kind of an interpretive couple of terms, but the best definition I can find is a variable in a given situation that could have the most significant impact on an outcome. So hopefully that's not too much of a word salad. So for example, Justin Jefferson is not an X factor. He's established. We know that so long as he has a somewhat competent quarterback, he's going to get 1,200, 1,300, 1,500, 1,800 yards. The X factors are kind of the guys that if they are good at their position, the Vikings can fly really high. If they turn out to be blah, that means that position is sort of doomed. So that is our makeshift criteria of X factors. We've got 6 of them on VikesNow. Were you going to say something there, Tyler?
Yeah, and it doesn't necessarily mean that the position you mentioned has zero depth. I think people want to conflate that with X factor. X factor just simply implies that there's a wide amount of variance, right?
Yeah.
That either it could go really good or really bad, but you can have an X factor at a position where, on paper it looks really good. So keep that in mind as well.
I am with you. All right, let's get to this list of 6 because we're conglomerating on them. We don't really have them ranked, but that's all right. Give me your first one.
Yeah, my first one. I'm just going to break the rules already because that's what I'm known for doing. Not a player, but Kevin O'Connell.
All right.
So if KOC's play calling is pretty good or elite, chances are our offense will be pretty solid, right? And that could put the Minnesota Vikings into playoff contention, battling for a wild card spot if everything goes right. But, if KOC turns into Adam Gase overnight, calling 21 dive on 2nd and long to establish the run to make it 3rd and manageable or whatever, and Darnold is just, sighing in the huddle, calling out the play, then, our offense is not going to be good at all. It doesn't matter how well Darnold could play. If our play calling is not great, he's set up to fail. And, I don't think that will be the case. But the thing is here is for the past couple of seasons now, Kevin O'Connell has enjoyed having an established above average quarterback in Kirk Cousins. Now that's gone. So all those little rookie mistakes that Kevin O'Connell made, or those little game management things that we would occasionally bicker about, despite his overall good reputation as a play caller, those will be, even more so under the microscope than they were before. Because now you have Sam Darnold out there, or now you have J.J. McCarthy out there. You really need your offensive play caller to be pulling that weight. So KOC is just going to be such a huge X factor for this team because we're really going to go as far as how well he calls the plays.
Yeah, one of those decisions that comes to mind that folks were up in arms was against the Chargers when they gunned it on the Vikings' final play to try to keep Chargers defense off guard. Boom, interception off the hands of Hawkinson, and if it would have worked, it would have been sweet. If it didn't, it was what happened. He became, the the scourge of the situation. What do you think is the minimum record for the Vikings this year that would keep most everybody happy about Kevin O'Connell?
I guess, well, that depends on how long Darnold is playing, if McCarthy sees the field. I would say if you get 7 wins, I think regardless of who starts, you're feeling pretty good. 7 and 10, that's not like a record you're going to brag about, but it's what last year we finished 7-10, right? And that was with like Dobbs and Mullins and
Hmm.
Jaron Hall for a game and a half. So if you can get to that same point in a year that's pretty much just bridge quarterback and maybe a little McCarthy sprinkled in, then I think fans will feel pretty good heading into 2025 with all that cap space, and they'll probably fix the defensive tackle position as well. So the team will be much better than it is right now.
Yeah, that's where I'm at. 7-10. A is a prediction. Even though I'll say it over and over, I'll talk myself into 8-9 because that always happens. One extra win after I see training camp. That's where I'm at for us to think. You know what? This thing's going all right. What did we expect with Sam Darnold? My first X Factor player with that variance we mentioned is Robert Tonyan. And it's not that I forecast him to, be some badass that's going to break out for the Vikings. It's that we need somebody to stabilize TE1 for however long, maybe 6 weeks, 7 weeks, however long the pup list thing will last for Hawkinson, which is what most of us think will occur. Because all of a sudden the Vikings have like 8 tight ends. It was like, hey, N'Keal Harry, you can play that, can't you? Robert Tonyan, why don't you come and play? We win this thing thinking Hawkinson would be out. Therefore, it would be Josh Oliver, who isn't really a pass-catching TE1. Maybe he morphs into that, but I doubt it. Johnny Munt, who's very lovable, but is probably a TE2. Nick Muse, who's on the roster. So there are Samus Rias, however you pronounce that. There's a lot of tight ends on the roster, and that's great. But they need one, mainly because it's an unknown quarterback proficiency situation. If it was Kirk Cousins, I really wouldn't care who the tight end was because I know he'd get the guy the ball. With Darnold and then McCarthy, I have no clue how it's going to work at TE1. So for the first month and a half, if Robert Tonyan is given those targets, I think he'll probably share those with Johnny Munt, but they need somebody that's identifiable in the middle of the field when you have question marks at quarterback. And I think if Tonyan can keep the seat warm until Hawkinson's 100% healthy, I think he can be that X factor guy. And a lot of that has to do with the one really sweet year he had with Aaron Rodgers, where fantasy football players know that he was a must add. He was like a fringe flirting with Pro Bowl kudos. So I think Tonyan has that variance where we could be hanging out on this show September 30th thinking, remember when I was just absolutely off the base and I thought Tonyan was going to matter? Or I could be like, God, remember that episode where I said Tonyan was going to be good? Look at us now. That's where I think he's an X factor.
Yeah, I'm curious to know, like, how do you feel about Josh Oliver as like an actual receiving target? Not even like a receiving threat, mind you,
Mm-hmm.
just as like because we're paying him quite a bit of money for him to just solely be a blocking tight end. If the Vikings were in a situation where they can't rely on Tanyan, how bullish are you on Oliver?
Normally, or at this time last year, I probably would have broadcasted, "Hey, this guy, he can do more than just run block." And that's because when the very first episode Thor Nystrom was on this show was, I think it was March or April 2023. And it was right after Josh Oliver signed. And he giggled because he said when he scouted Oliver coming out of college in 2019 or whatever it was, the guy couldn't run block. All he could do was catch the ball. And then you fast forward to past the Ravens era, and it's the opposite. We think he's somewhat maybe decent at catching the ball, but he's definitely a good run blocker. So I would say he has the DNA to do both, but then I always go back to kind of an adage on sports. Why hasn't he done it by now? Like all of a sudden he's just going to figure it out and be the ultimate tight end. So I have anxiety or reservations that he can be a do-it-all guy because you would have seen glimpses of it already, although he was behind Mark Andrews in Baltimore. So I would love for him to be the total package, but I'm going to guess that they prefer either Munt or Tonyan for pass catching, and then Oliver for run blocking, and the occasional, 12-yard gain. Hopefully, doesn't fumble it. That type of thing.
Yeah, for a guy as large as Josh Oliver is, he's not all that slippery. I
Yeah,
felt like every time they tried to like throw the ball to him in the flat or something like that, he'd get tackled within like 3 yards or so. So he's not exactly a yak threat. I mean, he's big enough to be a red zone threat,
yeah,
at his size and just the sheer muscle mass. But I agree. I think the Vikings would want to keep him as an elite, run pass blocker for a tight end and hope that Tanyan or Munt or even a little bit of Nick Muse can kind of get the job done as a committee at least.
yeah. Yeah, it's a really fascinating cam battle because there's so many guys. And I would say 2 months ago, it felt like, all right, well, Johnny Munt and Josh Oliver do the thing. And then Akil Harry's in there. And now Tanya and everybody knows because he was a Packer. So who's your next X Factor?
Yeah, I had mentioned, before we started these X factors, is that it doesn't necessarily have to come at a position that is weak overall. Sometimes
Mm-hmm.
it can be at one of our strongest positions. You can still have an X factor. But Shaq Griffin is one of mine because the Vikings are really strong at corner. Byron Murphy looks like he's finally moving back into the slot, which I think he could have, kind of a resurgent year. And you have, your Mekhi Blackmans, your Caleb Evans, your Kyrie Jacksons. But the thing is, the common denominator with a lot of these Vikings corners is that outside of like Byron Murphy, they're all on their rookie contracts. They're
Mm-hmm.
all rather young, inexperienced. Some of them are better than others. Like I'd rather see Mekhi Blackman out there versus an Andrew Booth. But the Vikings haven't had like consistent above average cornerback play since the Mike Zimmer era. If
Mm-hmm.
Shaq Griffin can be a very, very reliable outside corner, even just like Trey Wayne's level when he was playing well for us, that is going to mean so much to this defense because I truly believe the first sign of fall off from like the Zimmer era with our defense regressing was Xavier Rhodes, regressing and then ultimately leaving because you
Mm-hmm.
didn't have that corner who can just shut down the number one receiver one on one. And so it's going to help, matchups and schematics so much if Shaq Griffin is, you know, I don't expect him to be a shutdown corner, but if he can handle just individual matchups and you don't have to you know, scurry to help Shaq Griffin on this side and now you're exposed on the other one. It's going to make it so much easier for this Vikings defense to be successful. And it will allow our young players to be young players and make mistakes, which is 100% expected and okay. So I'm really looking at Shaq Griffin to be the reliable vet that the Vikings are hoping that he can be, especially since of the whole comp pick thing too. Like I guess the Vikings said, "Hey, we're not giving up a third round pick, in 2025 to sign this guy." So maybe they know something we don't, but it was a peculiar signing when he got him. So I'm really interested to see how well he performs as a starting cornerback in this offense. Or
Yeah.
this defense, my bad.
No, he's not Deion Sanders. He's not going to do both. 2019 was the last time the Vikings had because even Xavier Rhodes, that was the year where he got cooked and still made the Pro Bowl. That was the last time where 2018 was when they were less than elite. 2019 they were still good. I always look back at Trey Waynes, and because he was the Robin to Rhodes' Batman, he always seemed mid. But compared to what we've seen since 2020 started, it's like, hey, Trey Waynes would be pretty good on this team. So I'm right there with you. Do you think that there will even be a semblance of battle between Shaq Griffin and somebody else, or is this thing on? Who are the starting outside cornerbacks for you?
It's like, I mean, they can talk about how much it's going to be a competition at training camp all they want, but you don't sign Shaq Griffin to that contract if he's going to be the cornerback three. It's going to be Shaq Griffin as the starting outside corner. It's going to be Byron Murphy in the slot. And honestly, they might run so much three safety, looks that those are really going to be your true two starting corners. And, a Caleb Evans or Mekhi Blackman or whoever wins kind of like that third spot at corner isn't going to see the field nearly as much as they would have under like Donatel. So really your true starting corners are going to be the veterans.
Okay. Yeah, that's another this is a common theme for the Vikings. There's a lot of deep positions, but not true blue Pro Bowler at the top of the ticket. And cornerback is another example. I think they are at 9 of them now that Najee evidently converted to safety. My next X factor is Jerry Tillery. And I no big mystery. I didn't like this signing in March because there was about 8 to 10 guys who were significantly better than Tillery at defensive tackle, and we have not had a productive standout technique DT since Kevin Williams, and that was 11 years ago when he left. So when I watched Eric Armstead go off the board and Grover Stewart went back to the Colts and Christian Wilkins was too expensive, and then the draft came, and we remember that Friday second round when every good defensive tackle got chosen, and we were like, oh, hey, we don't have any second rounders, can't get in on this fun. So when you looked at Tillery was the consolation prize, I was like, blah. However, when I went through and did a little bit of homework, I've tried to figure out his PFF grade from last year. He played about 500 snaps. It was 67.7. And that is at least a little bit better than what we're accustomed to, whether when Jonathan Bullard, Shamar Steffens play in that spot. And I'm trying to remain optimistic that this Tillery thing can be somewhat unlocked by Brian Flores. Because, I mean, let's face it, Dalton Reisner had a PFF of 57, and we built a statue and had a parade for that guy. And so maybe you don't believe in the efficacy of PFF, but Tillery did pretty decent last year. Let's see, was he with the Raiders last year? Yeah, because the Chargers are who drafted him. So Tillery is an X factor because there is a chance, former first rounder and gets tutelage of Flores, that the spot we are so pessimistic about or cynical that they never find a good defensive tackle. They just don't even realize that you can get a guy good at that spot. Every regime in the last decade. I think there's a chance that Tillery, if he can win another bloated roster battle, that, hey, if he's good, then we don't have to sit there and be like, damn it, these DTs suck. But if he is not, and he's just Jerry Tillery, we're back to what we know and don't love, where it's just some placeholder, almost like Jonathan Bullard the last couple seasons. So I think the variance between Tillery being somewhat untapped potential versus being what we always know, just some guy, that's where we're at defensive tackle.
I want to ask you this question.
Mm-hmm.
So hypothetically speaking, if I believe it was Seattle, if they didn't take Byron Murphy, the defensive tackle, in the first round of the draft, and the Vikings are there at 17 trading up, and both Byron Murphy and Dallas Turner are both still available, would you have rather the Vikings gotten Murphy just to fill that defensive tackle spot, or is the upside of Turner and the positional value, does that exceed what you're getting from someone like Murphy?
Let's see. So at the time, I would have been Murphy 100% because I am hell-bent on speaking into existence the legality of being able to employ a defensive tackle who's good. So if you would have given me, the general manager, like, hey, you can go get Johnny Newton, you can go get Byron Murphy, I would say, yes, they finally get the message. But now that we've had the aftermath and how Turner has looked good in the spring and summer, and I do really love edge rusher depth for the first time since about 2015, 2016, I think I would keep it the way that it is, knowing that the emphasis, we hope, once and for all, will be defensive tackle next draft, because free agency doesn't have much to do at that spot. I know that's a wishy-washy answer. At the time, defensive tackle, bar none. I wouldn't have even thought twice. I would have said to the scouts on the staff, hey, which one is the best? We're finally going to do this. But I do not at all dislike Dallas Turner. The only thing about Dallas Turner that will make me roll my eyes is we wiped out next year's draft class to get him.
Yeah. And that leads me to my third X factor, which is, I'm just going to call an audible here. Initially, I was going to go with Jalen Nailor, but, you all watching have heard us, bicker about wide receiver 3 for so long now that, no one wants to listen to me talk about Jalen Nailor and his, injury history. So instead, let's just talk about Dallas Turner, because I do think he's a huge X factor.
Yeah.
He has looked good in the spring. Everything coming out about him seems to be really positive, but the Vikings lost Danielle Hunter. And yes, they signed Jonathan Grenard, but Grenard is not even on the same tier as Hunter was. Now, I don't hate the Grenard move or anything like that. I think the Vikings got him on a surprisingly affordable contract, but that is like comparing Everson Griffin to Danielle Hunter. Everson Griffin to me was like, a high-end number 2 pass rusher at his peak, in my opinion. And Danielle Hunter was, at his peak, one of the most dominant edge rushers in the entire league. The reason why Turner is such an X factor is because he has the potential to be that next Danielle Hunter, just from a purely athletic standpoint, he, like Darisaw talking about, his spin move was actually faster than Hunter's, and everyone heard that, and we were like, whoa. So it's if the Vikings get a bona fide elite edge rusher alongside Jonathan Grenard, it's just going to make everything so much easier for this defensive front. Plus, we don't really know what's going on with Andrew Van Ginkel at the moment. He's got some sort of foot thing he's working through. Will he be ready for the start of training camp? Will he be ready for week 1? Maybe, probably, but it's up in the air. So if Dallas Turner really hits the ground running and takes that job before Van Ginkel can really settle in as the de facto veteran starter opposite of Grenard, and Turner plays well, then you've got a really nice looking duo of edge rushers starting for the Minnesota Vikings defense here in 2024.
Yes, wholeheartedly agree. And Van Ginkel now somehow feels like gravy. Whereas for those 4 weeks between free agency, 5 weeks between free agency and the draft, it felt like the solution. So yeah, we'll see what comes of the foot thing. I will correct the record, and you're not going to be mad about this because you have the jersey on the wall. For about 2 months during 2017, Everson Griffin was absolutely an elite edge rusher. Like, you could stack him in the top 5 of the NFL.
Yeah, how dare I slander Everson Griffin by insinuating that he was never truly elite. He had stretches, where he was up there, but I was just looking, at his career more holistically.
Yeah, totally.
For the most part, he was definitely like a high end 2 guy. But I mean, there were moments where it was like, holy shit, Everson Griffin, right?
Yeah.
And I love that.
Yeah, in that 2017 season, he was so good in September, October, and I think in November that it was Defensive Player of the Year possibilities. He was just that dominant. And the thing I always go back to on him, for those who care, is he took 4 years, basically Mike Zimmer to show up in town for him to take off. And it's so weird now when I write about this football team every day, or we do shows about it almost every day. Think about the patience you would need. It'd be like James Lynch all of a sudden this season turning into a top 10 defensive tackle. That's
he
exactly
was behind Jared Allen, right? So for the longest time, it was Jared Allen doing his thing. We all know how great he is. So I don't even think it was an indictment on Griffin or anything like that. It was just Jared Allen is out there, and he's really, really good. So
yeah, and Robinson had the other side. But generally, the patience that you would need is somebody who either is a fan of the team or studies the team. Just somebody who lurks on the depth chart, and then after their rookie contract, they're back, and then boom, you're like, oh my God, this guy is really that good. And I mean, let's see, I don't even remember how many snaps he played. He certainly didn't start until like Zimmer arrived, and his blossom or his bloom directly aligned with Zimmer showing up. And I think a lot of that was, like you said, Jared Allen going away. But that's a cautionary tale that if you have somebody on this Vikings roster that you like that hasn't done much for 3 or 4 seasons, like, oh, hey, it worked for Everson Griffin. All right, my final one, we kind of flipped a coin about this one before the show. Maybe it's Captain Obvious, is Sam Darnold. And he is the almighty X Factor because he plays QB1. The Vikings are on tap or poised. They're going to give him the audition as such, unless something really unforeseen happens at training camp and J.J. McCarthy wins the thing outright. The reason he's such an X Factor, is as he goes, so goes the Vikings win-loss record. If he turns out to make a lot of people look correct and this Baker Mayfield comp is there, well, hey, the Vikings can be 10-7 or so and nibble at the wild card and maybe even the division if one of the Lions or the Packers take a little step back. But those are best laid plans when you look at, hey, the former draft stock, this guy's got to be good, right? Rich Gannon this week said the guy has all the tools. If he just doesn't turn the ball over, he can do the thing. Rich Gannon should know a little something about career reclamations. It's just that the other side of the X Factor is, just like I said for Josh Oliver at the top of the show, why hasn't he done it by now? Is Sam Darnold truly the victim of every horrible circumstance you can imagine? Maybe so. But he is the ultimate X factor on this team because he's a bridge quarterback. We all know that no matter what, JJ McCarthy has to get an audition. But in this segue season, if Darnold has the gumption to throw 26 touchdowns and 3,800 yards, then the Vikings don't really fall off too much from Kirk Cousins. And I think that's kind of what Baker Mayfield did last year, and therefore what the upside can be for Darnold. So therefore, I think Darnold is the almighty X factor for this season. Are you in the same boat?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, for the same reasons I mentioned Kevin O'Connell, you could argue for Sam Darnold that like Kevin O'Connell could call an Adam Gase game and it's not going to matter how well Darnold plays. You could make the same argument for Darnold where, you know, Kevin O'Connell could call the perfect game, but if he throws an interception for every 100 yards he throws in the air, then it's not going to really matter, you know, just kind of pulling a Nick Mullins. But it's, yeah, Darnold is really going to determine how our entire season plays out. Because if he's good, he's going to start the whole year. You know, that's going to give McCarthy, you know, the opportunity to slowly hone in on his craft behind the scenes. If he is so unplayable, they're going to have to turn to McCarthy earlier. And because, I mean, how long can the fan base deal with Nick Mullins or Jaron Hall if they go to that first to give McCarthy time? Eventually, if Darnold struggles, there's going to be fans, you know, calling for their first round
it won't take long.
So, you know, how well Darnold plays is really going to be the barometer for how this entire season goes.
Yeah, the one thing I am apprehensive about with Darnold is we just got off of a 2023 Vikings season that was undone and marred by turnovers. Like, that was the reason this team didn't go to the postseason, is because they looked like imbeciles on the first drives of games for the first 2 months of the season. So it's like, all right, hopefully that was a statistical outlier, that luck meter that Data with Bliss puts out. Maybe we can be in the middle or at the top of. But you're going with a QB1, at least out of the gate, who the only thing wrong with him is turnovers. And so it wasn't even Cousins who was the large merchant of turnovers last year. It was just a bunch of guys who couldn't stop fumbling. And then when Josh Dobbs started to devolve, he started turning the ball over too. So I'm a little skeptical that when you want to get right from a turnover-filled season, that your solution at quarterback is Sam Darnold. My other honorable mention here was Aaron Jones. I didn't put him on the list because he's too good in terms of a body of a career. But for me, he's an X factor to fix the running game because Kevin O'Connell's job security is going to get toasty if the guy never figures out how to run the football. Like, it's just, even from me, if we go into this year and it's like, hey, we're doing the show on January 28th. Did you know the Vikings finished 27th in DVOA again? I will be convinced the guy isn't cut out to lead a football team if he cannot figure out rudimentary running in the NFL. But I don't think that will. Go ahead.
It's funny how that shifted too. Going from, you know, fans being exhausted of hearing Mike Zimmer say establish the run to now all of a sudden it's like Kevin O'Connell, can he call it a run game? So it's like one end of the spectrum to the other.
Yeah.
So it's crazy. And another running back too is Kene Nwangwu, because of, you know, the return rules have changed. He's going to be much more important now than he was last year, where he was basically doing nothing the entire season because everything was just, you know, touchback or, you know, and just kneel it off in the end zone. So we have a couple of running backs there where you look at it and you say, wow, if this player does well, it's going to mean so much for this team.
Yeah, and the reason I have Jones is because I think he will get the bulk of carries to start, and then I'm sure he'll twist an ankle, and then Ty Chandler will get in there. That's just how running back life goes. But the cool part about Jones is because he looks so damn good in December and January last year that if that carries over, we can finally see what an O'Connell offense does when the run game is good. We saw it for, 3 hours against the Bengals when Ty Chandler looks like Dalvin Cook, and that offense cooked with a turnover merchant and Nick Mullins doing the thing. So I'm excited to see as an X factor if Aaron Jones can be the guy, only because I want them to fix the ground woes. All right, Tyler, you got anything else for this fine Tuesday?
Nope, that's pretty much it. Where I'm not sure exactly when the official start of training camp is, but it's got to be less than a month away. So we're just chipping away at that long summer. Hopefully we get some football action here soon. Thanks for watching, everyone.
Absolutely. I think it's June 21st when the players get there, and then when we're allowed there, I think it's, or excuse me, July 21st, and then July 28th. All right, man. We shall talk to you relatively soon, okay?
All right. Later.
Take it easy. Later.